Now, before we jump into this one, I want to give my thanks to Manscaped for this holiday season. Now, everyone loves a bit of turkey and stuffing over Christmas, but you're going to be looking like a dessert, okay, with the Manscaped Performance Package 4.0. What better topic to talk with the in-laws about than what your balls are looking like, okay? And you can get the Ultimate Men's Hygiene Bundle on manscaped.com, and you can use the code LASTLAP on the screen for 20% off. Now, let's be totally honest, lads. One of the most daunting things about trimming downstairs are the cuts and nicks that you're going to end up getting. With this hygiene bundle, you can make sure your plums are looking as smooth as they need to be. Now just listen to this. Listen to all of the things you're going to be getting in this bundle. A Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, the Weed Whacker and Nose Hair trimmer, because we all know they can get into a bit of a state sometimes as well. We've got your Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant to make sure everything's smelling kind of fresh. Crop Reviver Toner, Performance Boxer Briefs, and a travel bag to hold all of your goodies as well. Now the Lawnmower 4.0 has a cutting edge, if you'll excuse the pun, ceramic blade that makes sure there's no cuts and nicks. And it's even waterproof as well, just in case you get into some sort of other incident whilst you're shaving. The Weed Whacker for your nose and ears has a 360-degree device that makes it really, really easy to get those pesky nose and ear hairs out. As I mentioned at the start, you can get 20% off products at manscaped.com using the code LASTLAP. Okay, it's on the screen. That's 20% off and free shipping as well. You be thankful for manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you too. Now let's get back into the podcast.
All right, you lot, don't forget to give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and while you're at it, give us a 5-star rating. Trust me, it really does help us out.
There's so much media now. Yeah. There's so many questions, and one thing we always find really kind of frustrating and stunning, you know, it surprises me even today in F1, you can go into a press conference that gets televised, you know, on a Thursday. You get back to your desk and you might have asked a question in that, you know, in that session, whatever, and you look and you're like, 3 websites have already run those quotes. Yeah. Sure. And they weren't in the room, and they've maybe twisted the story a bit, and they didn't hear the tone it was said in. And you're suddenly like, man, that looks, now if that driver sees that, he might just think, oh, look, the media's just trying to, you know, is trying to dig me out, as you said. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's very easy for people who, for drivers, when they get asked a lot of questions, you can lump journalists all together in one heap. And I think that, you know, I can totally see where that comes from. You know, Lewis was always quite standoffish with some of the British media for years. Yeah. And I think that over time he's realized that actually it was only a certain, you know, number of them that were writing consistently negative pieces, and the others were actually, you know, were very complimentary of him, especially when he was winning a lot of titles. So I think sometimes the older drivers get, the more they realize, like, okay, there's guys here that, you know, that are doing a good thing. Yeah. But it can be frustrating. And I mean, you know, all it takes is one bad headline, you know, one headline that's clickbaity on a website, and the driver sees that and is like, I'm never being that open to the press again. Yeah. Lando was a lot like that, you know, around last year. I mean, it was a lot on social media, but stuff around, you know, his girlfriend and relationships and just social media and stuff like that. And there were so many headlines around it. I think he became, you could see he would kind of shut down when you asked him about it, which was fair enough. But it was frustrating because I was like, I'm not trying to be that guy. But I totally get why, you know, if you read 5 stories about you in a year and they were all negative, you're like, I'm never talking again.
Sure. So because what am I getting out of it?
Exactly. So in terms of fixing it, I'm not sure. I mean, that's why the relationships and actually going to the paddock's important, because I think those guys, when they see you, they build that level of trust and rapport with you, and they're like, okay, you know, I know Nate, you know, he's asking me good stuff. I've read his stuff, and that's the interesting thing. I've written stuff with people before. Especially there was one piece this year that I wrote, and the person that the story was about, I wouldn't say confronted me, because it sounds very aggressive, but we talked on the grid and it was tense. But you know, but now the relationship there is much better because we both talked it out, and there was some respect that we'd both kind of, you know, talk to each other about it. Yeah. So that does happen, you know, but that's the thing. A lot of those drivers don't get the chance to go face to face to journalists writing headlines or stories, because they're not in the paddock, or they're just writing from home or whatever. And I think then it's easy to blame other journalists you see around the place. That's not to blame everyone that's ever written an F1 story. Yeah, but I think it's probably a thing across all sports as well, that there's so much media now, and so much people want the quick hit a lot of the time. Yeah. Rather than like, let's make sure the story's right. It's like, let's make sure we get the story out first, and then you get mistakes.
That's interesting actually, because like There's almost sorry about that. There's almost this kind of thing of like, is it bias necessarily, or is it just people trying to get the first story out there? Is it just clickbait to an extent? You know, if there's negative press around a certain person or a team, is it just a company going, well, we want to just run that story straight away, or is it like genuine bias? Like for me, obviously, again, there's a lot of stories around Red Bull that have been over the last year. And maybe someone like Christian Horner would argue that maybe there's a bit of bias from the media towards Red Bull. Is that something you would go along with? Obviously, I know it's a very generalized, sweeping umbrella of the media, but is that something that you could understand his point of view?
I can understand the point of view because I've spoken to a lot of people in Red Bull, and this goes back to, I know we said we wouldn't talk about Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Don't worry.
It's a safe space.
It's not a blanket.
We won't talk about everything afterwards. But this goes back, I would say, to the start of last year, really. When Lewis and Max were put together, people were excited about it, but I think they started to feel that a lot of the coverage was, oh, isn't Lewis amazing? Isn't Lewis amazing? Oh, but isn't Max reckless? Isn't Max reckless? That. And to be honest with you, I think that was a narrative at the time, and it's something that certainly at times I would talk about when I did podcasts or something. It was like, yeah, Max has still got that element in him, and they would look at it and say, well, the stewards found Lewis to blame for Silverstone, for example, and Silverstone's really when they felt that bias started. Afterwards, it was all, oh, Lewis is amazing, what a race, what a win, and they were like, okay, well, Max went to the hospital after the race. And that's not to condone some of Christian Horner's comments after that. I didn't agree with, when he said some pretty evocative things. But since that point, they felt that they've been kind of targeted a bit. I think before Abu Dhabi, I love the Autosport publication, but they wrote, I don't know if you remember that open letter to Max, being like, please don't drive Lewis off the racetrack to win the race, which was, at the time, I remember thinking like, wow, it's one thing thinking they're going to have a collision together. It's another thinking like, this guy's going to drive Lewis off the track with no evidence for it. Yeah. So I think those things stick with you. And this year, I can't say, again, being on the road as much as I haven't been able to watch everything that Sky's done and that Ted's done, but I think that clearly there's been, when I've spoken to Red Bull, they've said, oh yeah, we feel this way about this this broadcaster or whatever. So when I heard about the boycott, I wasn't stunned. I'm not saying I agree with it being biased. And in terms of the comments that actually provoked the boycott, it seemed to be Ted saying that Lewis was robbed, right? Which, It seemed like a flippant comment, and I think in English we use that all the time, don't we? Every 2 years, England gets robbed at a World Cup or European Championship.
We just played worse.
We just say we've been robbed somehow.
Exactly.
So and I think if you translate that into Dutch or you translate that into other languages, it comes across a lot more strongly. And knowing Ted, I don't know Ted super well, but know him well enough that I think he would have made that comment just slightly flippantly on the show. Sure. But again, if Red Bull feel that way, they feel that way. I'd certainly feel that they're frustrated that Abu Dhabi keeps getting mentioned, and now there's the budget cap stuff that's come into that as well.
That's gonna keep getting mentioned.
They can't stop, can they? Yeah. They're constantly in the news for one thing or another.
And they waited so long for that championship, and then there's all these things. And look, people are probably watching this now, like slamming their laptop, being like, "Yeah, but those things are valid." I would say they are. They are valid. Abu Dhabi's valid. The budget cap is valid. But it's that frustrating thing of trying to keep two very separate things that could both be true at the same time, separate. Those things happening. And Max, in my opinion, being massively worthy of 2 championships, just the way he's driven. Abu Dhabi, he didn't. What was he meant to do? Be like Lewis? Actually, I'm not going to overtake. Daniel Ricciardo's still behind me, and he's lapped down. He was never going to do that. And Lewis wouldn't have done it either. If Lewis had won the title like that, he'd have said, "Oh, Red Bull are just crying about it." And Horner would have probably popped a blood vessel in his head if that had happened the other way around. So that's just the nature of sport. But
that's actually such an interesting question of how it would end up. Yeah, how it would have ended up if it was the other way around.
Can you imagine if Lewis had won his 8th championship like that?
That way, yeah.
People would have said, "Oh, it's tarnished forever. He beat Schumacher's record, but he shouldn't have done it." Like I remember on the plane back thinking, I was like, wow, like the conversation we'd be having right now if that had gone the other way.
Yeah.
And again, I wouldn't have thought that was fair at the time to blame Lewis for that. I'd have still been like so annoyed the race went down like that.
Yeah.
But both those guys on that day deserve to walk out of there and just having won it cleanly. And there's always going to be that doubt around Max. But if you're Red Bull, you're just sick and tired of hearing it. But I think as long as Christian Horner's alive, as long as Max Verstappen's alive, and as long as they're doing media interviews, Abu Dhabi's going to be there. So whether they think that's bias or not, that's up to them. But I don't think it is. It depends on the way you do it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
People can say I saw people saying Verstappen should have an asterisk next to his name and stuff like that. I thought that's a bit harsh because people have won championships in much dodgier ways.
MV -1 on Twitter was funny. Just that one.
Yeah, there's been some good memes. I saw people saying the speed limit in Zandvoort would be one with an asterisk next to it, stuff like that. Which I laughed at, and maybe laughing at it. I just think that's hopefully that's not a sign of bias or anything like that. But there's been some good memes.
It's just funny. It's just
it is.
I agree. I think these things can coexist. You can have the whole the FIA didn't really handle it well in the moment, but Max is still a deserving world champion. You can have
absolutely. And you look at the FIA now, we're still talking about them. Next season on, and we're still.
And it's a big thing, isn't it? Like I think that's the big thing that F1 needs to fix is every race. It seems like we're talking instead of talking about the drivers, we're talking about FIA this, FIA that. And it's becoming, I think there's so many people that have come in to the sport from Drive to Survive and have been really, engaged by these drivers. And suddenly they're like, who are these guys behind, behind I never see, who are dictating the outcome of races and championships? So I think that's frustrating. And, I think one of the things my kind of crazy prediction for the future is I can see F1 and the FIA, maybe not splitting in the future, but there's going to be serious discussions about F1 saying we want control of our own rules a lot better because it's such a talking point every single week.